The sun blazed over the dusty town of Oakhaven, its heat swallowing every shadow and turning the air into liquid gold. The square was filled with voices, loud, jeering, cruel. And at the center of it all stood a young woman, tall, proud, and heartbreakingly still. Clara Vance. Bare feet on burning wood, wrists bound with rough rope. Not because she was a threat, but because cruelty loved an audience. The auctioneer's voice cracked through the noise, listing her strength as if it were a flaw. Strong as an ox, he said, too much for her own family to feed. Laughter rippled through the crowd, but Clara didn't flinch. She had long learned that pain only fed their entertainment. Her eyes stayed fixed on the mountains beyond the town, a promise of freedom that had never been hers to claim. At 23, she was taller than most men, her frame built by years of labor, her hands calloused, her spirit unbroken. To some, she was an oddity, to others, a burden. To her uncle, Arthur, the man who sold her that morning, she was simply too much to feed, too much to love, too much to keep. And so he sold her. One bag of grain and a promise that his family would not starve. That was the price of her existence. As the auctioneer called for bids, a few men shouted, a cruel old widower who broke every servant he ever owned, a freight owner known for his wandering hands. Clara braced herself for whichever prison would claim her next. Then a quiet voice cut through the laughter. "Hold on!" The crowd parted as a tall man stepped forward, his presence steady as a mountain. Dusty clothes, worn hat, eyes the color of storm clouds. He looked at Clara, not as a spectacle but as a person. "What's your name?" he asked. Startled, she whispered, "Clara Vance." The man turned to the auctioneer. What did her family get for putting her here? Silence. Then Clara answered herself. 1 bag of grain. The stranger reached into his coat and tossed a pouch heavy with coins. "That's 3 months' wages," he said. "More than enough to cover whatever debt you think she owes." Then he looked at her again, and for the first time in years, she saw something in someone's eyes she'd thought had died long ago. Respect. "I'm Liam Sterling," he said. "I've got a ranch west of here. I need help. I pay fair, but I'm not buying you like livestock. If you come with me, it's because you choose to. And if you ever want to leave, I'll make sure you can." "Why?" she asked, suspicious. "Why me?" "Because," he said quietly, "everyone here thinks you're too much. But I see a survivor. I lost my wife and daughter 3 years ago. This ranch has been dying ever since. I need someone who won't give up." For a long moment, she stared at him, trying to find the lie. There wasn't one. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. "I'll work for you," she said, her voice steady, "for fair wages and the right to leave when I choose." Liam smiled, a small, honest smile that made the crowd murmur. "Deal," he said. Then, to the auctioneer, "Cut her loose." When the ropes fell, he did something no one expected. He stepped up on the platform and lifted her into his arms, as if she weighed nothing. The crowd gasped. Clara froze, breath caught in her throat. "You're just right for my arms," Liam said loud enough for everyone to hear. Then he carried her out through the stunned silence, away from the cruelty that had defined her life. That evening he brought her to his ranch, a lonely stretch of land nestled between rolling prairies and a quiet creek. The house was small, the fences broken, the barn sagging, but it felt alive. He showed her the room that would be hers. Clean, simple, with a lock on the inside. That one detail made her throat tighten. He wasn't just offering work, he was offering safety. Days turned to weeks. Together they repaired what time and grief had worn down. She carried posts, lifted beams, mended fences. He patched roofs and cooked simple meals. There was no master and servant between them, only partnership. She matched him in strength, and he matched her in respect. He paid her $30 a month, a fortune for a woman back then, and told her, "It's fair, not generous. You earn every cent." The work was grueling, but for the first time in years, Clara felt alive. Her laughter began to return, surprising her with its sound. He would tease her gently when things went wrong, and she'd find herself smiling without fear. But peace, they both knew, never lasts long in a land ruled by men like Bartholomew Thorne. Thorne was rich, cunning, and cruel, a man who wanted to own everything he saw. One afternoon, he rode to their ranch with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He told Liam he'd miss renewing the water rights. Without that, the land was worthless. "Sell to me," he said smoothly, "and I'll make this all go away." But Clara stepped forward, calm, steady.
"How much does the renewal cost?" she asked. $50, Thorne replied. 100 with penalties. "Then we'll pay it," she said. Thorne sneered. "You can't. The deadline's passed." "Unless," Clara replied sweetly, "someone interfered with the notice, which would be illegal, wouldn't it?" The color drained from his face. Liam watched her, awe in his eyes. When Thorne left, she turned to him. "We'll handle this together." She took out her savings, every cent she had, and together they rode to town, filed the paperwork, and saved the ranch. That night, as the sun sank over the valley, Liam looked at her and said softly, "I couldn't have done this without you." She smiled. "Partners," she said. "That's what we are." But Thorne wasn't done. Weeks later, his men came, 5 riders with cold eyes and violent intent. They threatened to burn the barn, kill the stock, destroy everything. Liam reached for his gun, but Clara stepped forward. "If you harm us," she said, "that's arson, murder, conspiracy. You'll hang." Her voice didn't shake. She stood her ground, and something in her fearlessness made the men retreat. When they left, Liam's hands trembled. "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't," she said quietly, "and they won't come back." They kept building, side by side, and in that slow rhythm of work and trust, something deeper took root. Love didn't arrive in thunder. It bloomed quietly, like morning light. Until one day, fate tested them again. Clara fell through the barn loft, hanging onto a beam for her life. Liam's voice broke with fear as he grabbed her, pulling her up with shaking hands. When she was safe, he didn't let go. "I can't lose you," he said, his voice raw. "You matter to me more than I can say." Her heart pounded. "You matter to me too," she whispered. And when he kissed her, it felt less like passion and more like coming home. That night, by the fire, he asked her to marry him. No grand speech, no promises of wealth, just love. "Marry me, Clara. I love your strength. I love how you fight. I don't want to spend another day without you." Tears ran down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Winter came hard, locking the land under snow, but their small home glowed with warmth. One stormy night, a young girl named Molly collapsed outside their barn, half frozen, terrified, running from Thorne. He had tried to force her into submission by buying her family's debt. Liam and Clara took her in, nursed her back to life, and gave her safety. When the storm cleared, they rode to town with the sheriff and a journalist. Molly told her story. The law finally caught up with Thorne, and the man who had once owned fear was dragged away in handcuffs, cursing Clara's name. Weeks later, in a quiet sheriff's office, Liam and Clara said their vows. No fancy church, no witnesses but the wind. "I do," he said, his voice strong. "I do," she echoed, her voice steady. And in that moment, the girl once sold for a bag of grain became a woman with a name that meant something. Mrs. Clara Sterling. Spring came again, soft and golden. Molly stayed on as family, helping with the ranch. One evening, under a sky painted with sunset, Clara turned to Liam and said, "I'm pregnant." He froze, tears welling in his eyes. "A baby?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "We're having a baby." He pulled her close, laughter and tears mixing in the same breath. By autumn, the story of the woman who was once too much had spread across the territory. At the harvest festival, Liam presented her with a silver arm cuff he'd made himself, engraved with a mountain, a barn, and a woman standing strong. You were never too much. You were always just right. He turned to the crowd. This is my wife, Clara Sterling. She saved my ranch. She saved me. As music filled the air and lanterns glowed, Clara rested her hand on her belly, feeling the faint flutter of life inside. She thought of the auction block, the jeers, the pain, and then of this moment, full of love, belonging, and purpose. She looked up at the man who had once said she was just right for his arms and whispered, "You were right, Liam. I was never too much. I was exactly enough." And somewhere beyond the mountains, the wind carried her words, not as a whisper of sorrow, but as a song of strength, reminding everyone who ever felt unworthy that sometimes the right person won't try to make you smaller, they'll make you believe you were always just right.